time I'll have to talk about my Army experiences. And that goes really way back in history. In 1947, the UN reached a decision that there was going to be a partition plan in Palestine, and a certain area would be allotted to the Jews to create a state. And that meant, of course, what Ben-Gurion knew, that the Arabs wouldn't accept anything for Israel, and so they were amassing their armies. And the Jewish Agency had a program, and the program, they called it Land and Labor. The idea was to get people to come to kibbutzim and to be ready when the war breaks out to take up arms. I finished high school when I was 17 and a half, so I had like a half a year extra, and I went to my dad and I said, look, I'm going to go to Israel, there's this program, I don't have to pay anything, they put me on a boat and sent me over there. And he said, you have to understand. And he spoke very slowly, very carefully, as if he was telling me a story, because he used to tell stories. And he said, your father, me, I was a draft dodger, and they put me on a boat. They snuck me out from Bialystok to the seashore, put me on the boat in the middle of the night to get to America, so as not to be in the army. But your grandfather, he also didn't want to go in the army, and they would come around, the Kosakim would come around the Jew houses and go in and shake everything up until they found young children and take them away for 40 years. So he went to hide in the woods, and he stayed in the woods until they stopped looking, and then he came back. And your great-grandfather cut off his finger and his right hand so that he wouldn't go to the army. You come from a long line of non-army, of draft dodgers, in essence. You didn't know the term yet. And he said, you can't go to the army. I said, okay. So I'll just go to a kibbutz. I'll start out my training. And he said, no. In Yiddish he said, Ich gib nicht oisken halbe gebacken. I don't put anything half-baked out onto the store. And you are not quite baked yet. And you have to at least be 18 years of age before I will let you do anything. It was the hardest thing I heard from my dad ever, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because in that first 6 months in Brooklyn College, I discovered my love for philosophy, and I was reading Plato every night until 2 or 3 in the morning, and it was a great half a year, and then afterwards I went to training, Shara. From there, I went to Israel, and that was already, I left at the end of 49, and I arrived in 1950 in January. Let's give up there. Within a few months I met Ophira, and at the end of the year we got married in October. And the year after, in May, we were told that we have to go to the army. I didn't know why. I said, I'll go to a kibbutz and on the border, and I'll defend it if needed be, but I don't want to be in the army. And they said, everybody goes to the army. In those days they said it, and they really meant it. Not like these days. But I had really no choice. The only thing I could have done is left the kibbutz and gone to the Hebrew U, and I wasn't even ready to do that. So in the beginning of May, I found myself in the army. Let's give up there. Within a few months I met Ophira, And at the end of the year, we got married in October. And the year after, in May, we were told that we have to go to the army. I didn't know why. I said, I'll go to a kibbutz and on the border and I'll defend it if needed be, but I don't want to be in the army. And they said, everybody goes to the army. In those days they said it and they really meant it. Not like these days. But I had really no choice. The only thing I could have done is left the kibbutz and gone to the Hebrew U, and I wasn't even ready to do that. So in the beginning of May, I found myself in the army. We found ourselves in basic training. All these nice, soft American kids, and we had to do all kinds of crazy things, really sometimes very frightening. There are two things I'll talk about. One, it was when we had to get up on a fence that was like 10 feet high and jump into a what do you call it, a reshet?
Net.
Into a net. And all my friends down below are holding the net. And everyone gets up and goes forward and jumps. And I'm standing in the back there and I'm shaking. And the guy in front of me, Moshe Cooper, people remember him, gets up there and he stands. And he stands and he stands and he stands and he stands and he stands. And it's getting dark already. So they take him down, and I think I can go away. But they took me from behind and they just pushed me. And boom, I fell down, they caught me. Yay, I was a hero. I was scared shitless. That was my first frightening experience, I would say. And the second one came exactly 1 week later. We read in the news that the Jordanian King Abdullah, the father of Hussein, most people will remember as the King of Jordan, was murdered on a visit to the old city in Jerusalem. And there was supposed to be maybe an uprising in Jordan, and there was great fear that they would say this is a chance to attack little Israel. And they put me up to guard. And now, then our base, where we were in Jerusalem, was like around 40 yards away from the Jordanian territory. It went right up to, well, really right up to the border. There were cherry trees growing on the left, and right in front of us there was a Jordanian outpost. And they sent me with my rifle, which I just learned how to use, more or less, to stand guard. So I go up there and I'm standing guard, and I look, and like 30 yards away from me, there's this soldier dressed like, I don't know, like a puppet. Everything was pressed with sharp lines, and he was the picture of a frightening soldier. And he's standing there, and he doesn't even sit down, he's standing. And I look at him, and he's looking at me, and I don't know what to do, so I'm just moving around a little bit, and he yells, "Want a cigarette?" So I smiled. I had my own, and I begin taking out, and he takes a whole packet of Players Virginia cigarettes, which at the time in Israel was something that cost sort of like half of an apartment house to get. And I catch it, and I take my packet of what was called El Al at the time. That's what they gave you in the army. The kibbutz had worse, but it was really a terrible cigarette. And I throw him my pack, and we both started smoking, and I see that he's going like this. He never had anything like that. And I'm enjoying my smoke. I finish, and he finishes, and I want to give him back the packet of cigarettes. And he says, no, keep it. And after that, we just sat and smiled at each other until I had to go back. So that was my my first meeting with the enemy, and it was a very friendly one. And all my friends enjoyed a player's cigarette apiece, and that was it. To what's now Bet Shemesh. Then it was called what's it called? Hartuf, yes. And we were sitting opposite the train tracks, actually, not even the station. The station was a little further away, and we were limited on our water. And some guy from the camp across the way, which turned out to be the city of Bet Shemesh afterwards, came trying to sell poppy seeds that were salty. And so we bought a little bit, but we really couldn't.
Not poppy seeds. Not poppy. Sunflower?
Sunflower seeds, sorry. Sunflower seeds. Okay. Sunflower seeds. And we couldn't really eat them. And we were there, and we were training every day, running and walking and climbing. And one day we're sitting down and resting. And all of a sudden, or the day before actually, a whole group of Iraqi Jews got off the boat, and they were brought from the boat right into our camp, in the middle of our field training. And they came with their baggy pants and kafiyas, and most of them couldn't speak a word of Hebrew. Some did. They had a few that spoke Hebrew. And this young kid who was their corporal and who studied the British Army ways is standing there with a stick, and he yells, "Attention!" And they're all standing straight, and this one guy was standing and shaking. I saw him, and he was so frightened, he let go of his rifle. Now, in the Israeli army, to drop your rifle is a great sin. But of course, they didn't know anything. They were still in their baggy pants. They didn't even get their army clothes yet. But he goes over to the guy who's still standing at attention and shaking, and he takes a stick and he begins to beat him. So, me and Speedy and the third guy, I think was Moshe Sidewater, but three of us got up. None of us are small. We ran over and we grabbed this corporal who was a little guy. And we threw him on the ground, and we took his stick and we beat him a couple of times. And we told him, "You don't do that." And we walked back under the tree, and we were sitting there happily. We did a good deed. And not the sergeant, but the lieutenant comes, and he says, "You guys did something terrible. You're going to have to go to jail." We said, "What? We did what's right." He says, "Okay, you're going to have a trial." I said, "Okay, we'll have a trial." But they didn't know what to do with Americans, because we were there voluntarily. And they said, "Look, we put them in jail, they're all going to leave." So they contacted the kibbutz. And in the kibbutz there was a guy by the name of Dudu, who I was close friends with his father and mother. Father especially told me stories about Russia. It was really a wonderful thing. And they sent him to talk to the crazy Americans. And he came and he sat with us, and we explained that we only did what was right. You can't let somebody just beat somebody up like that. And he tried to explain that this is the way the army is, and the one thing you can't do is go against the commander. And I said, "But I read I already read Uri of Neri. I read that the army said that it was wonderful that people used their good sense because the officers in the back didn't always know what was going on, and they wanted to count on that." So he smiles, he said, yes, I told you that. He said, but this is now a formal army. So you just have to say that you're sorry. And I said, I'm not going to do that. And we all decided we're not going to do that. So they sat and they spoke and they said, okay, you'll come up for your trial. We came up for our trial and they said, okay, don't do it again. And let us free. That was the end of our trial. They really had trouble with Americans. So that week on Friday, I decided to run away from the army for Shabbat because nobody checks what happens on Saturday. And I took a nice long walk and I got to a very young kibbutz, Tzorah, which is our neighbor now. And because I worked with cows in America, I went to the dairy and I walked in and there was this lovely South American girl and she looked at me and she said, what can I do for you? And I said, I'd like something to drink. So she took a liter can full of fresh warm milk and gave it to me. It was the first time I ever had milk from the cow. And I enjoyed myself and I came back. I came back to the army and I was in trouble again, but they knew with Americans you can't fool around, so I was excused. That's the end of that part of my army life. And that way I would become a full-fledged corporal, ready to train soldiers and lead them in battle. These courses went, I made some really good friends there. It was really nice, and the weather was good, it was cool, and there my marksmanship came in very handy at one point. We were running along the ridge of a mountain, and the corporal stops us and says, take a look at the other side, which was already the Arab side, and there were, what do you call them? Ayalot. Not deer, but
Baby deer.
not. No. Well, gazelles. Gazelles. We have mountain gazelles all around Israel, and we see a couple of them standing. One nice-looking male there, and he said, "Everybody shoot whoever hits the target will get a present." And I shot my first shot, and I got a gazelle. And then they said, "What do we do with it?" And I said, "Well, I worked in the kibbutz as a dairyman and a shepherd, and sometimes we'd have to kill the sheep or when they were sick, and I'd skin them and I'd prepare them for the kibbutz to eat." So they said, "Okay, you stay there." I said, "I'll need some help. 2 guys go to help you, and you stay there, and we're going to come back in the evening, and we're going to have a party. You prepare the meat." So they put us in a mountaintop that's in, what do you call it, no man's land. It wasn't next to Budrus, next to the city there, but it was in the middle. And we're there, and for me it was no big problem to prepare the gazelle, cutting it up in pieces. The other guys were getting wood, and they made a nice fire and coals, and so we could cook. I heard the story afterwards, but all the soldiers went back to the base happy and singing, and the corporal is yelling and saying, "You have extra punishment tonight. Aside from your regular training, we're going out for night training. We'll be out past midnight." and he bought bottles of beer, and they put in there where they keep usually their bullets, where they put the bottles of beer. Each one had 2 bottles, one on each side, and they all marched out for their punishment. And they got to where we were, and we had a wonderful time. And when we got back, the whole army base was talking about it. We were the heroes. I thought it was good, but I had to pay for it in my second course. And I'll tell you how that happened. Anyway, we finished the course. I got a great mark on the course, and they said I was good officer material, just not well enough organized to do it. I got alphabet instead of olive because of that. I had a week at home. In the meantime, I think Zvi was born, and my second daughter, and then we went back, and there I am with a whole new crew and new officers and new everything, and we're running around and doing things that we had to do, learn how to attack a building and such. And one night, and the story of how this group of soldiers from the first course had this wonderful time and party and killed a gazelle was being talked about. So another group decided they wanted to do the same thing. Only what? They went looking and they couldn't find any gazelles. Instead, there was an Arab cow that was wandering around. So they killed the cow. The owner of the cow was upset. They called in the UN. And the cow was really in no man's land. And this was winter already, January. And I was sent out with the 2 other guys, and we had to spend the whole night waiting for the UN to come. Because if you don't go there to watch over the cow, then the Arabs will come and they'll pull it across the line, and then it'll be an enemy territory, and then Israel will be blamed. And this way, it was a mistake. So I was stuck there the whole night, and only at 8 in the morning, freezing cold, all 3 of us there, we were released, and they sent other soldiers down. And I said, God has punished me. And that was it. That was the end of the story. And I finished the course properly with no other problems.